How's it going, everyone? My name is Miles and this is the Make with Miles channel. Today I'm going to be showing you how I made this 5-panel hat. Let's go. I first started by tracing the patterns for the main body of the hat onto some denim. If you want to make your own hat, there's a link to the site where I found the patterns below. After tracing and cutting out 2 top panels and 2 side panels, I then cut out the front panel. For this, I'm using some Pendleton Woolen Mills fabric, which I got from the Pendleton outlet near where I live. I cut it a bit oversized so that I could add a piece of fusible web, which I then ironed on. After peeling off the paper backing, I then ironed on a thin piece of muslin to add a bit of structure to the hat. Next, I traced directly around the pattern and cut the front panel to its final shape. For this project, I'm using my dad's sewing shop and one of his industrial machines, but you can still make a hat like this using a home sewing machine. After I'd cut out the front panel, it was time to sew together the 2 shorter sides of the top panels. Next, I trimmed off the excess fabric on the inside of the seam. This makes the next step a whole lot easier. To make the inside of the hat look more finished, I used a double needle setup and a bias tape maker, which I taped to the sewing machine. I then fed through some grosgrain ribbon and I began to sew. This process sews 2 lines of equally spaced stitching on top while attaching the ribbon over the inside seam. I then sewed on the front panel and I repeated the same process I did on the first seam. When sewing on the ribbon, it's important to be pulling the 2 sides of fabric away from each other so that the area in the middle is lying flat to prevent any wrinkles. After the front panel was sewn on, I attached the side panels and again covered the inside seams with ribbon. Next, I used some wool edge binding that we had for the very back of the hat where the strap would be. A good alternative to the wool would be some bias tape. Now that I'd constructed the main body of the hat, I started working on the brim. I already had some 1/8" stiff foam lying around, but I've added a link in the description where you can find something similar. I traced the shape of the brim onto some Pendleton fabric, and then I stacked it on top of a piece of black denim, which would be the underside of the brim. I then sewed on top of that line that I traced and inserted the foam piece inside. Next, I sewed right up against the back edge of the foam using a zipper foot. After that, I sewed a line of stitching on top of the brim as close as possible to the outside edge. This allowed me to cut off the excess fabric on that outside edge, which also included the first line that I'd sewed. I also cut the excess off the back, making sure to leave about a 1/2 inch of fabric. I then tried to sew 4 evenly spaced lines of stitching through the brim, which proved to be difficult. last step in making the brim was binding the front edge. An alternative way to make the brim without having to bind the edge would be to sew the top and bottom pieces together and then turn it inside out before putting the foam inside. This would also yield a nice result with a very clean edge. It was now time to attach the brim, so I started sewing from the center, and once I'd finished one half, I came back from the other side to finish it off. Next, I sewed a thin strip of stiffener around the base of the hat to add some more structure. I now had to make the sweatband. There's a link in the description to where you can buy some pre-made sweatbands, but I decided to make one myself. I started by cutting out a long strip of soft foam, and then I sewed a piece of synthetic mesh fabric around it. To attach the sweatband to the hat, I made a makeshift binder attachment by folding up a paper sleeve to act as a guide. I then taped that sleeve to the table and began to sew on the sweatband. Once that was done, I had to make the adjustment strap in the back. I used a stiff grosgrain ribbon and a center release buckle. Once I threaded the ribbon through the buckle, I folded over the excess sweatband material and tucked in the strap. Once I'd sewed that half in, I cut another piece of ribbon and threaded it through the other side of the buckle. Next, I folded over the raw end of the ribbon and bar tacked it. After sewing in the other half of the strap, I wanted to add a sleeve for holding a pencil. I used a small piece of denim which I folded over the edges and sewed down. I then serged the other two edges to prevent the pencil from catching when it's taken in or out. After sewing that pencil holder on, this build was complete.